So let's start creating the get methods, and let's start with the comedians first. So the first one is get comedian, which of course returns a single comedian for this ID. Now the first thing will be logging the information, so we'll go to logger.log information, just like we did before. And here we can simply say that we are getting comedian for a specific ID. And now we create a query that actually gets the comedian. So I'm going to create a query variable and go to our context. So even context dot, and the data set we want is of course comedians. We are getting a comedian, so we have 3 data sets for the event, for comedians, and for the gigs. So in this case we want the comedians, and we want this where the IDs match. We want the comedian only for this one ID. So in our where clause we'll use a lambda expression where we will specify that we are only interested in a comedian that has the comedian ID that matches the comedian ID that is being passed into this method as an argument. And that's all. That's our very simple query. We'll go to our comedians dataset that picks up all the comedians, but then we will filter it down to a comedian whose ID matches the parameter in the method. And then we can simply return it. So again, we will do a return statement and we'll make it async. So we'll do await and we will return the query, but we only return the first record that it returns. And there should be only one because the IDs are of course distinct. But in case something goes wrong and there are more records, we only return the first one. So we will do first or default. And we will do async as well. So in order to make it work, we have to make the task async as well. And of course, in order to use the first or default async, we need to bring in the namespace for Microsoft.Entity Framework core. So this is our async method for returning a comedian. The next one is to get all the comedians. So I'm going to grab the logger information and place it here. And this one can simply say that we are getting all comedians. And now we can create a query. And we'll go to our event context. And again, we'll go to comedians dataset. And this returns all the comedians as is. But we can go and specify an order in which we want them returned. So we'll do order by, and in a lambda expression for the comedian, so C goes into C dot, and we can return him by, let's say, last name. So they will be in alphabetical order by last name. And at the end, we will return, and again, await, since we'll make it async, the query. And since the query is a collection, we need to specify that we want to change it to an array, because that's how the JSON will actually return them. So we'll specify toArray async, since we are doing async methods. And in order to make it async, we'll make the task async as well. And finally, we have the get comedians by event. So once again, I'm going to borrow the logger information, place it right here, and we can simply say that we are getting all comedians for event with the ID of event ID that is being passed as an argument. And now we want to create a little more complex query, because we need to actually now specify also the event. We need to return a collection of comedians for a specific event. So I'm going to create iQueryable, because we are going to create a query of type comedians. And I'll call it again query. And just as before, we'll go to event context, but this time we actually go to .gigs dataset. And that's because if you look at the gig dataset, let's have a look at the model here. It has the event as well as the comedian. So from this one, we can get both. That's why I'm going to gigs dataset. So of course this just returns all the gigs. So we can filter it down with a where clause. And we want to only get the comedians where the c.event event ID equals the event ID argument in this method. However, this only returns the gigs for this event. What we want to actually return is the comedians for the event. So we'll do another lambda expression for the select, because we only select the comedians instead of the gigs. So we'll do c goes into c.comedian. So this will pick up all the comedians for this event. And again, we can order them by their last name. So we can do order by, and we want to order them by c.lastname. And this is our query. So again, we go to gigs because it has the events as well as the comedians. So from gig, we match the event ID, and from there, we only select the comedians for that event. And now we have it in our query, which we can return. So we'll do return, and again, await since it's gonna be async. And we are returning the query, and just like before, since we are returning collection, we need to specify that we want it converted to an array async. And of course, we need to make the task async as well. So these are our get methods for the comedians. So next, let's do the event.